Hello everyone. For today we are going to talk about the self from the various philosophical perspectives. And as you know it, in this subject we are going to use different lenses or different fields in understanding the self. That will be philosophical, sociological, psychological, physical, sexual, digital, economic. So basically, we are going to take a look at the self from different disciplines. But we will begin by looking at the perspective of philosophy. So let us start. Before we go to the different philosophical perspectives, first let's try to answer these guide questions. The first one is that what do we even mean by the self? Okay, so I am trying to communicate with the inner philosopher in you. Okay, so if you are given the opportunity to define the self, then what would the self be? Is it a soul? Is it something that we see? Or is it something that is connected to other things? Or is the self not connected to others? Is the self unique or is the self similar to others? Okay, and what are the components of the self? Is it made up of mind and body? Do we even have a soul? Okay, and there are different ways to define the self, and that's how the philosophers introduce the concept of the self to us. Are we souls, bodies, or fragments of someone else's imagination? Okay, some would say that the body is not the true self, but rather the soul or the being is the true self. Okay, and the body that we have is just a temporary self, or this is just a replica of the true self. Other than that, there are also perspectives who will not believe on the existence of the soul, so they say that what you see is the reality. Okay, there's no such thing as life after death or life before living. Okay, what you see is the self. Okay, do not go further. Do not try to look for things that we cannot see. So they only believe on the existence of the self because the body exists. Or here's another thing to question the existence of the self. Are we fragments of someone else's imagination? So has this ever crossed your mind that you are not really alive, but rather you are just alive in someone else's imagination? What if this is not really life, but rather this is just a dream of someone else? What if we are not really in control, but rather someone is telling us what's going to happen? And we just think we're in control, but in fact, we are not. Okay, so those are some interesting questions to answer, but I don't think that we'll be ever able to answer them. Okay, because most of what we're talking about here cannot be verified by science. Okay, it will be hard to prove that one perspective is more correct than the other. So are we just minds or are we a combination of mind and body? Okay, so is the mind even connected to the body? Or is there a conflict between the mind and the body? Okay, is there even a mind because we cannot see it? Okay, those are some questions that philosophers ask. Will I survive bodily death? Or is it the end of my when my bodily self die? Okay, so basically not just philosophical but also something related to faith, so, to our beliefs. Okay, are we going to exist after our life here on earth? Okay, or is this even our first life? Did we have a life before this? Or is our life just a continuation of someone else's life? Do we get reincarnated after death and do we live a new life? Okay, so those are different beliefs about our existence. Or here's another interesting one. Am I a robot controlled by some entity? So now you're asking, am I really in control? Am I really human? Okay, does a human being have free will and free choice? Okay, the first philosopher that we are going to talk about in this discussion is Socrates, and he is from Greece. And in comparison to philosophers, other philosophers focus on answering questions about the universe, about science, about mathematics, about gravity. Okay, those are the things that they problematize. Socrates was one of the first one who was concerned with the problem of the self. So he asked questions about our existence and what does it mean when we say the word self. So that's how he differed with other philosophers, and because of his ideas, there are other philosophers who also question about the meaning of the self, the meaning of beingness. Okay, and in Socrates' idea, he believed in a dualistic approach and understanding the self, meaning he is one of the first philosophers who believed that the person is composed of a body and a soul. Okay, and I think that most of you believe in this conceptualization of the self, and let's thank Socrates for that contribution. Okay, so just remember that when we say soul in this discussion, it does not necessarily refer to the religious definition of the soul, but rather, for some philosophers, it's not. It may have, or may not have anything to do with religion, but some of them think of soul as something that we cannot see, something that make us move. Okay, it's an entity. Now, thanks to him, a lot of a lot of people believe today that we don't just have a body, we also have a soul. Okay, and he is also famous for this quote: an unexamined life is not worth living. It means that as human beings, Socrates believed that we should know how to question the existence of life. We should know how to reflect. We should know um, how to talk about things that are beyond what we see. We should question ideas, okay? Because for him, a life should be examined. We should reflect on the meaning of life. We should reflect, for example, even in the meaning of death, okay? And for him, that makes life worth living. And another thing is that he is famous for this quote: the only thing, one thing only I know is that, and that is, I know nothing. Okay, so we would assume that Socrates would believe that he knows a lot because he's a philosopher who is very, very intelligent, but Socrates believes that he knows nothing. Okay? Maybe by saying that, what he's trying to tell us is that the more that we know, the more questions we ask. And as we grow older, we have more questions than answers. Okay? And the more we wonder, the more we realize that there's a lot of things that we still don't know. Okay, and there are a lot of unanswered questions. And the only way for us to answer these questions is to continue asking more questions or examining life. Okay, and Socrates is also known for believing that a soul exists before the body, and the soul exists in what he called the realm of ideas. Hence, he is one of those who believe that even before our life here on earth, we have been already existing. Okay? And in the realm of ideas, our soul is full of wisdom. We're very intelligent, we're very smart, and we can answer the most complex questions about life. However, when the soul comes into the material world, or the earth, or the world that where we exist, the soul forgot everything. Hence, by being born into this world, you are no longer as wise as you once were in the realm of ideas. And Socrates believed that even though that happened to you, we can still connect you to your past self, the one in the realm of ideas, by examining life. Hence, that's why teachers like to ask questions to their students, because we want you to actualize your potentials, or we want you to be wise. Okay, because that's Socrates' belief. Okay, and he is known for what we call Socratic approach or Socratic questioning. And Socratic questioning is also used in psychology. Okay, and in psychology we define the Socratic approach as teaching by asking questions. Okay, and sometimes, because that's the best way to teach, to ask questions. So we ask a lot of questions about life, and eventually the one being asked will have a lot of realizations that he would have been able to answer this question. He only need to write only need to answer the right questions, or he only needs to ask the right questions in order for him to be aware of of these things that he wasn't able to answer before. That's why we do raise a lot of questions for you to think deeply, for you to analyze, because I want you to I want you to be wise, and I want you to connect with your inner self in trying to answer the different questions of existence. Okay, this time let's talk about the perspectives of Plato. And Plato is a student of Socrates, and he founded the academy, okay, which is the prototype of today's universities. Okay, the universities nowadays are designed after the academy founded by Plato. And in his theory, he believes that there's a dichotomy between the ideal world and the world of materials, or the material world. And he believes that the world where we exist right now is not the real world, but rather this is just a replica of the real world. And for him, the real world is the world of forms, and it only exists in the realm of ideas. Okay, it's not something that we can see or touch, but rather it's beyond our consciousness, it's beyond our awareness. Hence, who we are today and the world where we live in today is just a replica of the real world. Okay, so I wonder, how did he describe the ideal world? Okay, I wonder how it looks like. Okay, if it cannot be seen, it cannot be touched, how does it feel like to be there? Okay, those are some interesting questions to ask. And he is also, so basically we can see how Socrates influenced Plato, because he also believed in a dichotomy. Other than that, Plato conceptualized the self as a divine, or the soul as a divine, the most divine aspect of the self. Okay, when he says that the soul is divine, he doesn't mean it in a religious nor spiritual way, but basically he's saying that the soul is the most intellectual part or aspect of the human person. So he believes that there are three components of the soul: the rational, the spirited, and the appetitive soul. And the rational soul is the one that uses reason. The spirited soul is the neutral one, while the appetitive soul is the one who pursues desires. So a healthy person somehow balances the demands of the rational soul and the appetitive soul. And as early as now, I can see that this has influenced the perspective of Sigmund Freud, wherein we're going to talk about him later on. Okay, this time let's talk about the perspective of St. Augustine. And according to him, man is bifurcated by nature. Okay, so basically, we can now see the influence of Socrates even to other philosophers. Bifurcated means he also believed in a dichotomy. So guess what? That since earlier we have been talking about dichotomies, and in his own version, he believes that the two aspects of a person would be the imperfect, or the earthly self, and the one capable of reaching immortality. So basically, the perspective of Saint Augustine is also influenced by Plato. The only difference is that Saint Augustine also think that this world is a material world, and there's another type of world, and that world is where we would like to live in, because that is the world where God is. Okay? And that is the ideal world, and we should strive to be reunited with God so that we can live in that world. Okay, so the goal of the person is to attain the communion with the divine, or to be able to be reunited with his creator, or God. Hence, in order to do that, one must live a good life, so that when that comes, he would be reunited with God in heaven. So the world of materials is not our final home, but this is only a temporary one, because the real world is the world where God is. Okay, so basically similar to the perspective of Plato, but St. Augustine was the one who allowed us to realize that this perspective can also be integrated in religion and faith, and this is basically the philosophical perspective that I can see that has been very influential in Christianity. Okay, now let's talk about St. Thomas Aquinas, one of the teachers, doctors of the church. Okay, and according to St. Thomas Aquinas, the man is also dichotomous. So this is the influence of Socrates. Okay, a lot of philosophers have believed that a man is composed by a body and a soul, And according to him, our two parts are the matter and the form. Okay, and when we say that, basically that's his own version of body and soul. So the matter is the common stuff that makes up everything. In layman's term, our bodies. You, your seatmates, your friends, your families, they have their own bodies. Okay, and we are similar to animals, other creatures in a way that we have a material being, and that's our body, that's the matter. But what makes us different in comparison to other human beings or other creatures is that we have our own form or the essence of a living. Okay, that's why even though you and other people have bodies, you are different because you have your own souls that makes those bodies move. Okay, so those are the two as parts of the human being, the matter and the form. Okay, now let's talk about Rene Descartes' perspective, and he's very famous for his quote, "I think, therefore I am." He is the father of modern philosophy, and he's known for that quote that I told you a while ago because he is the one who endorsed what we call hyperbolical doubt. Okay, and he doubts the existence of his own physical body. So for him, the existence of the body is not the proof that he exists. It's also not the proof that you exist. Okay, so that's the doubt that's the doubt that he exhibited in his day-to-day interactions. But how can Descartes prove that we exist? He said that the mere fact that I can doubt is the evidence that I exist. Even though I don't believe that I exist because of my body, the mere fact that I can doubt is enough to prove that I exist. Okay, so he basically he's one of the reasons why we question a lot of things about existence. Okay, and he will tell you that your ability to question things is the proof that you exist. So basically, now we are seeing perspectives that will not endorse one of the two, one of either the body and the soul. In this case, Descartes does not endorse believing in existence because of the body, but for him, it's doubt that makes one exist in the world. Okay, now let's talk about John Locke's perspective. And according to John Locke, our identity is not Locke in the mind, the soul, or body only, but rather what makes his theory unique is that he believed in the concept of memory. Okay, so let's talk about this. Identity is explained in terms of the psychological connection between life stages. So according to him, the reason why your identity is formed in that way, it's because you can remember what happened in the past. Okay, for example, the reason why you're so hardworking today, it's because you remember that when you were a child, you were rewarded for being hardworking. Because if we don't have memory, then how are we supposed to have a continuous identity? Okay? Think about the movies wherein the plot is a person who have memory problems. It seems like they're a new person or a clueless person for every day of their life because they don't remember anything from the past. So it's hard to live in that way. Okay? And thanks to John Locke, we learned how to appreciate the concept of memory. And also he is also famous for what we call tabula rasa. So earlier I told you that Socrates believed that even before existing in this world, we have already existed, and we are only clueless because when we were born, we got disconnected from our former self. Okay? But according to John Locke, there's no such thing, but rather to him, the person is born like a blank slate or tabula rasa, which means when the person was born, he really knows nothing. He is clueless about the world. And just like a tabula rasa, just like a notebook, just like anywhere where you can write, whatever you write in that blank slate will be encoded. Hence, when you raise children, be careful what you write or what you teach them, okay? Because they're going to remember the things that you write in their blank slate or their mind, okay? So That's the perspective of John Locke, that the person is a blank slate upon birth, and eventually you learn more, and their ability to remember allows you to be who you are today. Here's another perspective, okay? David Hume is known for bundle theory, and he believed that all knowledge is derived from human senses, okay? Meaning he valued what we call empiricism. Hence, they don't believe on the empiricists are less likely to believe on things that cannot be seen, but rather they value the capabilities of the senses, okay? That's why a research is called an empirical study, okay, because we don't only assume but rather we study something and we make use of our senses. We see, we hear, okay, we feel, okay. So in bundle theory, he believes that the person or the self is a collection of impressions, okay. And what are impressions? Impressions are vivid products of direct experience, okay. For example, um, what you feel about what you feel when you talk to your sibling, perhaps that's happiness, and that's your impression. What you feel when you are climbing a mountain, that's fear or anxiety, that's your impression. What you feel about watching TV, okay, that's your impression about watching TV. So we have a lot of impressions, or in layman's term, feelings or sensations or perceptions, okay. Now, eventually, we get to keep our own copy of these impressions, and now he calls that idea. Okay, for example, I will ask you, do you have an idea how it feels like to watch TV? Okay, you are not really watching TV right now for you to know how it feels, but rather I am asking you if you have an idea, okay, or your imagination. So how do you think it would feel to watch TV, or how do you think it would feel when you are talking with a baby? Okay, so it's no longer an impression, but rather it's an idea or a copy of an impression. Now let's talk about the father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud. And contrary to the common misconception, Freud is not the father of psychology. That would be Wilhelm Wundt. Okay, Freud is one of the psychoanalysts, or he is a doctor who was able to theorize about the unconscious. Okay, and he's the father of this field of psychoanalysis. And a lot of people either followed him or criticized him. And he is known for his theory about the unconscious as well as the ego and superego, and he believes that the ego is not the master in its own house. But first, before we go to that, let me tell you what are the basic assumptions of Freud. He believes that we have two drives, the eros and the thanatos, meaning everything that you do can either be classified as under eros or under thanatos. In layman's term, what he means by eros is sex or pleasure. What he means by thanatos is pain or death, okay, or aggression. So in layman's term, Freud believes that there are two drives, sex and aggression. And you might question, why did he use the word sex instead of pleasure? It's because he lived in the Victorian era wherein it's a taboo to talk about sexual stuff. So he believed that perhaps because it's not allowed to talk about sexual stuff, perhaps it's one of the things that motivate us. Okay? And a brief history about Thanatos. Originally, he did not believe that we are capable of aggression. He only added Thanatos after the death of his daughter Sophie after the war. So he believed that people have the capability to hurt others. Hence, people are just motivated by two things, either pleasure or aggression. Okay? Pleasure is the reason why you want food, why you want water, you want to relax. Okay? You want things that make you happy, while Thanatos is the reason why we hurt each other. Okay? And according to him, um, suicide is one example of behavior coming from the Thanatos. However, since the society doesn't allow us to take our own life, what we do is that we displace or we channel that that drive to others. That's why you harm people or you hurt people, maybe physically or psychologically. Okay? And these drives are unconscious, meaning we are not aware that we are driven by these two. Okay? But they continue to motivate us in our daily life. So you either look for something that will make you happy or you try to avoid anything that brings pain as a healthy individual. Okay? And he is known for his theory that there are three provinces of the mind: the id, the ego, and the superego. Do you remember our discussion about Plato? I told you that he was inspired. Okay, I'm just hypothesizing here that perhaps he was inspired by Plato. Okay, but anyway, let's take a look at this. The id is the pleasure principle. Okay, so the id is the reason why you want to take long sleeps, why you want to nap during a discussion, why you want to eat, or why you want, basically, the id is the reason why you do a lot of pleasurable stuff. For example, it would tell you to party on a Friday night, or to drink, or to eat sweets. Okay, the ego is the rational one. Okay, it's the one in contact with reality. And unlike the id, the ego is more rational. Hence, it will not tell you to do things that are only for pleasure, but it allows you to think about it or delay it. Okay, here's the proof that the ego exists. If you don't have an ego in your body, then you might eat even though in situations where you are not allowed to eat. For example, you might eat in a theater because the id is telling you to eat in a theater. But we know that in the theater there should be no foods and no drinks. Okay? So, if you are an id dominated person, you will do things that are not allowed because you are doing it for pleasure. However, because of the ego, you can delay your wants and your needs until it's appropriate to pursue them. That's why you know that you should only pee in the restroom. Okay, that's why you know how to delay your needs. You know that you should not eat if it's not yet lunchtime. Okay, and that's the role of the ego. It's the one that delays the the fulfillment of these needs in a healthy way. However, if there's too much delay, there's too much inhibition, there's too much delay, there's too much control, that won't be healthy. And that is basically the role of the superego. The superego is like the angel that's telling you what to do and what are the things that you should follow. It reminds you of the rules. Okay, for example, it's on a Friday night, you are deciding, what am I going to do? Your id is telling you to go to a party, while your superego will tell you to study. Now, it's the ego's role to know which of the two will prevail. Is it the superego or the id? So there's a heavy burden. Okay, the ego does a lot. Okay, and look at this. Freud believes that the ego is not the master. Hence, he believes that the ego is weaker compared to the very strong id. Okay, so it's understandable why we are driven by a lot of pleasurable desires. Okay, and we are basically in every day of our lives, we try our best not to be controlled by our own desires, but we do our best to control the desires and not to be controlled by them. Okay, so to end this first slide about Freud, let me ask you: a healthy person would be dominated by what? The id, the egos, or the superego? It should be the ego, not the id, because if you're id dominated, then you're impulsive. You're someone who likes pleasure all the time. You cannot wait. Basically, you're like a baby who wants pleasure right here, right now. Okay, that's an id dominated person. On the other hand, a super ego dominated person is someone who doesn't know how to enjoy life because maybe this person only studies, or this person doesn't know how to party, or this person is the one who will, for example, a very conservative individual, someone who always follow the rules, even though he or she can break the rules from time to time. Okay, so you don't want to live a very careful life, but rather you want to live a balanced one. That's why you should be ego dominated, not id or super ego dominated. So other than the id, ego, superego, he believes that we have three levels of mental life: the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious level. So basically, we are here right now in the conscious, okay? And the conscious is just a very small part of the self. Okay, and the largest part of the self is the unconscious. However, you are not aware, is because it's what? It's unconscious. Okay, and how does the unconscious differ with subconscious or the preconscious? Okay, the things that are in the preconscious are can be they can be recalled. sometimes easily, but sometimes with effort. They can be memories or stored knowledge. For example, I ask you, what when is your birthday? You're not It's not conscious because you're not thinking about it right now. Okay, it was in the pre-conscious. Okay, because it can be recalled when I asked you. Now that you recalled it from pre-conscious, it transferred to the consciousness. Okay, so basically what makes up consciousness is what you feel right now, what I'm saying right now. But when I ask you what did Plato say again, then you have to get that from the subconscious. Now, what are the things that are in the unconscious? Freud believes that there are a lot of things that are in the unconscious, and the things that we put in the unconscious are the things that we cannot accept, the things that we try to deny. Hence, we put them in the unconscious. Perhaps you are ashamed by them or you don't want to recall it anymore. For example, your fears. Okay? Sometimes you're just afraid if you're in a certain place and you can't explain it because it's in the unconscious. Your violent motives. What if you hated your grade 1 advisor or your grade 1 teacher and you really wanted to hurt him or her back then? But of course, your parents will scold you. That's why you did not do it. However, Freud would say that it doesn't go away. That hatred is still deep inside you. And other things that are in the unconscious include sexual desires, irrational wishes, immoral urges, shameful experiences, selfish needs. Basically, the things that you don't openly talk about in public, things that you are hiding about yourself, things that are best kept secret. Okay? And according to Freud, the things in the unconscious, even though you don't know them, they motivate you in your day-to-day behavior. Okay? For example, your anger towards your parent, for example, may transfer to your teacher. You cannot figure it out. Why am I angry towards my teacher? Then you realize that my teacher's characteristic or personality is similar to the characteristic of my parent. Now I understand why am I always angry in front of when I am talking to this teacher. Okay, so that's how Freud would explain our day-to-day behaviors. Most of the self, a large part of the self, is not conscious, but rather it's in the unconscious. Okay, and those unconscious ideas will try its best to be conscious, and it may be conscious in a good way, but most of the time it becomes conscious in a bad way. Okay. Okay, now let's talk about perspectives that do not agree with the dichotomous views of the earlier philosophers that we talk about. The first is the perspective of Gilbert Ryle. So he denies the existence of internal non-physical self, meaning he only believes in the body but not in the existence of the soul. And the self is not an entity that one can locate. Okay, so don't try to look for the self because you cannot locate it. It's not in one location, but rather according to him, the self is just a convenient name that you use to describe all your behaviors. Okay, so if you want to understand yourself, do not look for a soul or do not try to look for a location where you can find the soul, but rather look at your day-to-day behaviors. Okay, and that's the self. There's no such thing as a self that cannot be seen. Okay, and that's how we answered the dichotomous questions raised by the earlier philosophers. He is also known for his story or his metaphor about the university. So, in his metaphor about the university, he says that one day there is a group of people who went to a university, and you're the one who gave them a tour, and then you showed them the library, the canteen, the clinic, the classrooms, the office of the dean, etc. But these clueless this group of people who don't have a clue, they ask you, you have showed us the library, you have showed us the canteen, you have showed us the classroom, but where is the university? According to Ryle, they asked the question, where is the university? But they did not know that they are in the university. So that's like how we search for the self sometimes. We ask questions like, who am I? Or what is really my I want to know more about my personality. Okay? who am I meant to be? But according to Ryle, in order for you to understand yourself, just look at what you're doing in your day-to-day behavior, because that's the self. Okay? And here's another perspective that denies dualism, okay? And according to Merleau-Ponty, he denies the dualistic ideas by saying that the mind and the body cannot be separated. So according to him, let us not believe in the perspectives that try to separate the mind and the body, because we cannot it will not lead to anything productive. It will be futile. So let us not try to separate the mind and the body. Let's not think of the self as the body and the soul, but rather the mind and the body cannot be separated, and they're always connected with each other. So basically, what is experienced by by the body enters the mind. That's why they are connected to each other and they cannot be separated. So basically, that is it for our discussion on the philosophical perspectives about the self. And in the next discussions, we are going to take a look at other perspectives, such as sociology, psychology, sexual and physical self, and many more. Okay, and I hope that you learned a lot from this discussion and continue asking questions about the self. That's it, and thank you.